Hello, I thank very much the organizing committee for allowing me to share some thoughts about big data in neurorehabilitation. Not long ago, scientists involved in physiotherapy would claim for the need of big data, and large initiatives in the US have already allowed to collect large retrospective data on recovery after brain injury and are working to collect prospective data. So the need is quite well felt in this field. In Europe, there is a large collaboration in the field of aphasia, supported by the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, that is collecting data on language recovery throughout the world. Data collection in language and cognitive rehabilitation has greatly increased after the advent of technology like computers, tablets, allowing to treat and assess the patient at the same time with automatic storage of results, bringing the easy method to collect data. In this example, using a tablet, it was possible to identify prognostic information that could be used for future studies or future rehabilitation in the single patient. Because if we consider that from this study, more severely language impaired patients did benefit from simpler tasks like word identification, while less severely language impaired patients did benefit from more difficult tasks, we can have the opportunity to use this data to tailor the intervention on a single individual based upon the clinical features extracted, also with the help of technology, with also reducing the burden on personnel which are already loaded with different multitasking issues. And this approach may lead to the development of computational neurorehabilitation using statistical analysis and biological knowledge on neuroplasticity to understand and improve recovery. Computation is made easier now by the introduction of technology also in the field of physical rehabilitation, such as robots, motion capture technology, and wearables. The first attempts were on post-stroke upper limb rehabilitation, but this is already expanding to other domains of rehab. In this example, a model based on clinical data could predict outcome only in up to 80% of cases, and a subgroup had less recovery than predicted, and computational rehabilitation models now existing cannot predict which patients will fit the prognostic model itself or explain the variance in those who do not. But the question is if we may improve this prediction by collecting more data or by using them in a different manner. But this leads to another question. Which are the data we should target, our favorite data to focus on, and how should we handle them? We can move from clinical to neuroimaging, but also neurophysiological data, patient-reported outcomes, but also patient-provided outcomes, both passive and active, in the sense that passive do not require tasks to be performed by the patient, and this could reduce not only patient burden but also stigma which is required when we ask the patient to perform given tasks, maybe in the presence of significant others. And in this example, the proposal is to handle big data based on neuroimaging, analyzed using machine learning, which brings out the issue of how to handle big data and also heterogeneous data. In this other example, modeling is proposed with big data from a digital platform, offering the advantage of enhancing a patient's involvement and of reciprocal feedback and exchange of information between the patient and the physiotherapist. A digital platform and collection of big data would also allow to evaluate the efficacy of different interventions and maybe of different individual professionals, helping to identify those in need of continuing education or retraining, or also helping to perform some self-assessment even by the professional. And in this example, the proposal is to handle big data on motor rehabilitation based on different joints classification. So again, the concepts of data collection and also of handling are quite interconnected. But computational power may also allow to integrate different information, such as that coming from neurophysiology, as it is known, for example, that motor and somatosensory evoked potentials may help predicting recovery of motor function after stroke. So ideally, one information is not excluding the other, provided that we know how to handle them. So why not combining the informations on joints, on kinematics, information on motor evoked potentials that give us a measure of corticospinal reserve and measures of neuroimaging that gives us information not only on the location of the damage but on the severity and type of damage. But we should not forget about patient-reported outcomes. PRO, or patient-reported outcome measures, PROMs. These are receiving growing attention in the field of neurorehabilitation as well as in the field of pharma, expanding the concept of recovery to include the one of perceived well-being, which payers are starting maybe now to consider also in the field of neurorehabilitation, and which are starting to be required by regulatory agencies for drug approval. And we should also consider that the issue of patient engagement is not relevant only from an ethical and social point of view, but also from the point of view of adherence to treatment, because it is not feasible to propose a very effective intervention that the patient does not like. For example, I'm participating to a global multi-stakeholder initiative aimed at including PROMs in multiple sclerosis, where I am co-leading the e-health working group to establish the current return of e-health investments for all stakeholders involved and to enable patients, doctors, and other stakeholders to benefit from the long-term benefits of e-health. And first of all, I would point to the fact that many clinical trials assessing disability would have benefit from the use of sensors to assess disability. But that's just an example. Not to think about subjective symptoms like fatigue or sleepiness or pain that must be assessed with PROMs. But the use of digital PROMs may allow an additional advantage, which is the granularity. The regular schedules of our visits, even in chronic diseases, are in terms of once a year or once every 6 months, and we might miss many events because some events are transient or some are slowly progressive, and so you might either miss them if they are transient in between visits, or we might detect them when it's quite late and already 6 months have elapsed. So the possibility to use even traditional tools and questionnaires, but on a remote basis, would allow us to improve the time resolution of an old measure like mobility or mood. So even transforming a questionnaire into a digital form would allow us to detect changes earlier than we normally do if we wait for the patient to come to the clinic. And again, digital patient engagement may be improved, but we should be careful about digital divide. Not all patients like technology, and stigma that may be associated with the use of these devices outside the clinic. And we also have to consider about not moving too far away from the patient by giving the patient too many responsibilities and loneliness. So digital tools should not be a new sort of pacifier that we use to leave the kids alone playing with something, or we use to let the patients take care of themselves without any interaction. We must find a way to combine patient-based care and patient-centered care with adequate communication and interaction. Also, in clinical trials, there is a call for the use of digital data to improve feasibility, and now more than ever because of the pandemic that introduced distancing rules to reduce the risk of infection. But how were we organized in Europe to manage telemedicine when COVID-19 arrived? I have to say not so well, as in many countries, including Italy, some of the initial telemedicine was unfortunately via telephone because of a lack of infrastructures, but also because of lack of regulations. Think about reimbursement of a televisit. We did not have even the infrastructures not only to perform the televisit, which can be done using telephones, using video equipment, but the regulations for reimbursement. So we should be prepared to transition from the traditional tools in the neurological examination to sensorized neurological examination and digital profiling of our patients, as it is already ongoing in some centers. For example, in Harvard Medical School, patients are profiled using sensors. But we also have many tools to analyze, monitor our patients. There are already medical devices approved for remote detection of atrial fibrillation, or other devices approved again in the US by the FDA to detect seizures. So why not for detecting the need for neurorehabilitation or to monitor the results of neurorehabilitation? We already have the tools to analyze the gait in the lab, from kinematics to electrophysiology, including electromyography analysis that can be performed even remotely. And we may use them to answer ecologically valid questions, such as we may warn our patient against walking with socks. That's one example from our lab, but it was performed in the lab. So the actual behavior of people could differ a lot when we test the same person in the lab and when we measure the patient in their free life in their home. So it could be ideal to have something where the patient is free to behave normally and not feel the patient is being tested. For monitoring MS, multiple sclerosis, there are already digital tools developed directly by pharma. Here are two examples, one by Biogen and one by Roche, Connectome and Floodlight. And so there is also the issue that many pharma companies have their own digital branch, and now there are active stakeholders to cooperate with and to involve in our networks dealing with big data. There are also European-funded initiatives to collect big data on sensors. I'm involved, for example, in this one, Mobilize-D, that includes the aim of developing an algorithm to predict falls in people with MS and in people with Parkinson's disease. I'm also involved in this European-funded study, RADAR, CNS, using apps and commercial sensors, wristwatch, to monitor disability and depression in people with MS. We were already investigating people with MS using these devices when the pandemic arrived. So the study participants had already their sensors, their monitoring app in their cell phone, so we could see that they started to stay at home, to reduce mobility, to use the cell phone for social interaction days and days before the national lockdown. The national lockdown was on March 8th, and patient 1 was announced in the media by February 21st. So technology is already there and people are using it, even though we are not preparing guidelines, we don't analyze data, we don't give feedback. They already use, for example, the cell phone to communicate to each other and to network and exchange information. And in this case, information was that it is better to stay at home and stay safe. But a patient with a chronic disease is really safe by staying at home. I mean, we need technology also to allow telerehabilitation, because this story from February 2020 was just the beginning of a story which has become long, giving us one more reason to work towards telemonitoring and telerehabilitation. The technology for rehabilitation is already available, so it is our task to validate it and to use it to collect big data. So we should just organize ourselves and get together and network. But we should be aware that more data means more problems in how to handle them. So we also need to move forward with the science of big data. And so this is the right meeting to discuss this issue as well. We need to standardize outcomes also for clinical trials, but also for real life, which have intrinsic messiness, but also messiness, as they're being collected in many different ways, as pointed by our colleague Professor Lisbeth Peters. We may personalize rehabilitation by the combination of neural markers from neuroimaging to neurophysiology to clinical markers, and it's important to say that EAN has a dedicated section in the website on scales and scores, and patient-reported outcome measures and patient-provided measures that could be digital, allowing not only active but also passive measures. So we need to join forces between the different scientific organizations from different fields, including data scientists, but also different stakeholders like tech and pharma companies, and first of all, the patients. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.